My maiden name is Muniz, actually, Josefina Muniz. My full name would be Josefina Margarita Muniz de Rendon, but they don't do that in here, so my last name is Rendon now. I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, believe it or not, but I've been in Texas over 50 years now. I came as a teenager. I ended up going to El Paso, where my brother was living at the time in Fort Bliss. He was in the Army, and so I came to El Paso, and then he became a professor at the medical branch here in Galveston, so I ended up here in Houston. And then I met my husband, so. I was born in June of 1949 in San Juan. And I've been here so long that if I say I'm from San Juan, some people think I'm saying San Juan, Texas, instead of San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm semi-retired now. I've been a judge for 40 years now, 1983. But now I visit as a judge, is what I do, and then I do mediations and arbitrations. I haven't practiced law since, again, 40 years since I became a judge. I've been a judge ever since, one kind of judge or another. I think friends, people who have helped me and invited me to do things that I probably would have never thought of, like being a judge. I probably would have thought of, applying to be a judge or trying to be a judge. But I had friends who, little by little, have helped me, and obviously I've helped back. And yeah. Actually, I was going to go into sociology or in teaching, but my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now, was going to law school, and I learned a little bit about law school through friends, and I became curious about it. So that's how I became a lawyer. But still, thinking that I was going to be doing social work more than law practice as such. I remember a friend who was taking the courses in the law school already, and there was the curriculum that they had, and I saw the word torts, and I never heard the word torts, and I became curious about it. So I don't know why that still is in my mind as to how the word torts have made a difference in terms of my curiosity to become a lawyer.
And what is that word?
Torts is when people, when I hurt you, that's a tort. So, personal injury cases, they're tort cases, so anyway, so I don't know why I became so curious about it, but it was great. Other than, there were so few minorities at the time. I think there were like 15 Latino students in the whole school, and very few women also. So I was in a class of 70, I believe, and there was like 11 women. So that was an interesting experience, to be so much in the minority. But other than that, it was great. I enjoyed it, and here I am. Again, when I went into law, I said I'll probably be doing social work, which is what I wanted to do. But I'll probably be doing better if I'm a lawyer doing that. Other than that, I didn't have a clear path. I'm not, I guess, not that organized where I said, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life or anything like that. And again, a lot of what's happened to me has been because of my friendships, Well, after that, we got married the summer after the first year of law school, so we were already married by the time we graduated. He actually graduated in May, and I graduated at the end of the summer of that year, 76. And so he took the bar before I did, and then we waited till I took the bar. He found a job with MALDA, Mexican American Legal and Education Fund, and he was going to be the local counsel here. But before he could do that, they wanted him to do an internship in San Francisco, where the headquarters was. So we waited till I took the bar, and almost immediately after I took the bar, we went to San Francisco. And we were there less than a year. We were there like 10 months, at which time, though, I did work with the Public Defender's Office in San Francisco. And then we had our first child, too, there. Actually, I had applied for a government job with the federal government, But I was straightforward enough to say I'm pregnant, and I didn't, and they pretty much even said it, so that they didn't think it was a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they wouldn't do that, nowadays, but it was no problem saying it then. And I guess I've accomplished quite a bit. Now that I look back, I say, oh, I've accomplished quite a bit. But as a planner, I've never been a good planner. So I didn't have any plans other than my son was a baby at the time, so I was with him. And then and I actually was invited to. I had a friend named Juan Contreras who. Had been a student with me in law school, and he actually owned a building in the middle of the East Side in Houston, he said, "Come over and you can practice law with us." I would be separate from them. There would not be a law firm as such, but and you can pay me 10% of whatever you make per month for the next 6 months or a year. And so I said, good. So I moved in with them as a lawyer, started practicing immigration law and actually criminal law, since I had been with the prosecutor's office in San Francisco. And the first year I gave him $14, 10% of my of what I made the first month as a practicing lawyer. It was challenging in a sense because I was used to California criminal defense, and Houston had a few differences. So I remember once when in San Francisco, if the attorney appeared in court, the defendant didn't have to appear, as long as the lawyer, his or her lawyer, was there representing them. In Houston, the defendant had to be there, so I went one time. I told my client he didn't have to go, and the judge issued a warrant for his arrest. So I went to the judge and said, "Hey, Judge, I was in California, and this is the way we did in California, and it's my mistake, And she immediately, removed the warrant. So it was no problem other than, the scare for a second there that I had made, a mistake because of the, different laws in different states.
Do you feel like you're being bilingual? How did that impact your career?
Oh, I think quite a bit, at least for my satisfaction that I was able to, help people who were having problems with the language itself. But yes, actually, even some government agencies in Texas actually pay more for the same job, but they pay more if you're bilingual than if you're not. So that's another benefit, I guess, of being bilingual. I never did advertise as such. I just, went to the different courts and asked for appointments, so
Okay.
I would get appointed. Like this was an appointed, this was not an appointed case, but other cases, were appointed. And then one thing I did though, is that I love to write, so I offered to write for La Voz de Houston back in, when it was the largest Spanish language, newspaper in at least in the city, I think in the state. And so I would write a little column for them, and I think that it was not purposely done for advertising, but I think it did some advertising for me, in that people would read it and say, well, she knows what she's doing. When I was Civil Service Commissioner, I still practiced law. It was sort of a part-time thing that I did, and we didn't get paid or anything. It was just a position in government.
Tell me more about that. I'm really curious. So that was, my notes say it was 1980 that you were appointed
Yes.
by Mayor Jim McCon
Uh-huh.
to the Civil Service Commission. What exactly was the Civil Service Commission?
It was interesting. In the Civil Service Commission, what they did is hear appeals from employees of the city who were fired or disciplined for any reason. And so they would appeal to the Civil Service Commission, which was 3 of us, and then we would decide after hearing the evidence whether the city was right or wrong in disciplining the people. What was most interesting was because the police department is one of those agencies in the government of Houston, and we heard quite a few cases of police officers being disciplined for one reason or another. And so that was very, very interesting. So I can give you a very good example, and I'm surprised because it was big time in the media, and then I looked for it in the internet recently, and there's some reference to it, but not as much as there was back when. But there was a thing called the De La Hotel incident. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it was some police officers, about 13 of them, were having fun somewhere. They were having dinner. And then they left the dinner, and then they started, they were drinking quite a bit. So they ended up deciding to go to an apartment complex, which is called the De La Hotel, but it was really an apartment complex. And it was mostly in the South Main area, and it was mostly African American tenants there. And so they started knocking at doors and then hitting people, insulting people, that sort of thing. And there's 13 of officers doing this. And so some of them, about half of them were fired, period. And the other half were, disciplined a little here and a little there, depending on their, involvement. Some were there and they just saw it happen and didn't do anything. So they deserved in many ways to be not fired necessarily, but at least, disciplined. And so we had to hear that. And that was probably the most fascinating case I remember doing it as a civil service commissioner. And the result was that we thought that some of them should have gotten a higher discipline, which is interesting because usually we would be, quite employee oriented in the sense that, hey, they didn't do so bad, so, let them not have the discipline. But in this case, if we had the power to give them a worse sentence, a worse discipline than the city gave them, we probably could have. But we could either, reduce it or say, no, you cannot discipline them, but we could not give more. But we were so offended by the whole thing. It was interesting.
So you were the first Latina and first woman on that commission?
And yes, there had been no Latinos at all in there. And there had been one African American, I believe, at the time, and then no women until now. And actually, I was again, I don't plan for these things, so I had a friend whose name was Ben Reyes at the time. He was a councilman at the time, and he approached me. We were having a dinner, and he was talking about how the mayor was looking for someone for that position. And then he looks at me and says, he grabs my purse and he said, "Why don't you apply?" And sure enough, I applied and I got the appointment. So, well, I was besides being civil service commissioner, like I said, it was a part-time job. That it was just a service to the community. It was not really a job as such. I did by then I did not only criminal law but immigration law, which I enjoy much more than any other kind of law. When I got named judge for the city of Houston, then I could not be the civil service commissioner for the city of Houston.
Okay.
So that's when I stopped being a civil service commissioner. At the time, only males would get the positions, any position of respect or authority. It was mostly men, and mostly white men for that matter. Right around that time is when the equality started coming a bit more, and so it just so happened that the moment that there was a position there, and there was a councilman who was a man but Latino, and he knew me from friends, and then he invited me. So, but other than that, it took a while, from being mostly male to being more equal. And in '96, I quit being a full-time municipal judge and became a full-time mediator and a part-time judge. So I stayed as a judge until 2008 when I got elected to the district bench. And then after I stopped being in the district bench 4 years later, they invited me back, basically.
So going back to the appointment by Mayor Whitmire, how did that happen?
Again, you apply, but you have friends who say, "Why don't you apply?" And this time it was the Mexican American Legal Defense. MABA, Mexican American Bar Association in Houston, and so they knew that there was a position coming, and that they were looking to add more diversity to the city. And so some friends asked me, why don't you apply? I think you have a good chance. And sure enough, I got the position. A lot of people don't ever get to go to court. The only court that they may ever visit is the municipal court, because that's the court where there's a traffic ticket or, something rather small that happens to just about everybody. And so in a sense it was good to be there and be able to make decisions regarding, the cases that the normal people had, and it was good. It was, because I think I did a good job in listening and trying to make the fairest decision possible. So, like being a municipal judge, it was it was a 2-year term. So that means that, if I was there 12 years, I was appointed 6 times.
Yeah.
And then even more, because I became a municipal judge again after I did my work in district courts. I enjoyed it, and it was good. Yeah, it was better. Being a judge is definitely better than practicing law. Practicing law is a lot more stressful in that you have to make sure that you represent, represent the people well. While as a judge, you only have to listen to the lawyers, say why you should rule in their favor as against the other. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot easier, definitely, less stressful. And more, it has more impact on the community, I think, as a judge than as a lawyer. So that was important to me. There's different kinds of district judge. It's a statewide position supposedly, but it's really also county. And so there is the juvenile district court, there's the family district court, there's the criminal district court, and then the civil. So actually there had been a Latina already appointed to each, not appointment, but elected to the other 3 types of district benches, but not to the civil bench. Mm-hmm. So I became the first Latina state civil district judge in Houston. And I didn't really like the campaigning too much, but it was in 2008, that's the year that Obama was elected. And so a lot of the people in the Democratic Party here locally thought that there was a chance, that the Democrats would win. So they wanted to make sure that there was at least one Democrat for each position that was, being for the election that year. And so, I was pretty much, invited to apply to be the candidate for the Democratic Party. And then we pretty much got a lot of the positions, not all of them, but we got a lot of, that was the first year after many years that the Democrats started, getting some elections and elected in Houston.
I know you said you didn't quite enjoy or like the campaigning aspect of it.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes, and you meet people who are not very friendly, who like the other candidate, and some candidates who try to put you down and say bad things about you. I was lucky enough that the person I ran against and me didn't do that, and we actually talked to each other and everything. Yeah. Often there was somebody who didn't like me or my position or whatever. So it was hard. Even within the same party, people run against each other, and they want to win so bad that they do bad things against the other side. There was not a platform as such. There was more of I'm experienced sort of message. I've been a judge for a long time. I'm a good listener, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it was not a platform as such. Okay. Yeah, there's 3 levels of trial courts in Texas, and this is the highest of all of them. And it was interesting. The cases that I heard were multi-million cases. Sometimes, they were big time cases, and so. There was quite a few interesting cases that I heard. Now I look back and I see much more than I did at the time. The one thing is that I liked a lot is that the district judges often have interns, which are law school students who intern with judges and everything. And the other judges used to keep me around because I was probably the judge with the most interns working for her, and I would take them everywhere, and then really try to mentor them as much as possible. So that was a very fun part of my job as a district judge. Actually, when I ran, again, I didn't like politics. When I ran the first time, I won by very little against the very popular incumbent. So that was, I was unexpected in many ways, but I, ran against the incumbent and I won. The next time so I won by very little. The next time we ran against each other again, and she won by very little also. And so what was really, in a way, heartwarming was the fact that the day after I got that I lost the election, I got called by the presiding judge of the municipal court and said, "Hey, we want you back. We'll take you back." And so I got invited there, and then also I got invited somebody from the legal counsel for the justice of the peace courts in the county also called me and said, "Do you want to be a visiting JP?" And I said, "Sure." So I got 2 judicial positions right after I lost the main one. So that was again heartwarming, because there was friends who were inviting me to, and were not happy either that I had lost. So there was a movement to that said basically that our legal system of litigation and legal disputes is very imperfect, and some important legal people in the country felt like we needed to do some changes. So there was a movement to find alternative methods for dispute resolution. In Texas, we have the chief of the first Court of Appeals, his name was Frank Evans, who fell in love with the concept of alternative dispute resolution, especially the mediation part, and I can tell you a little bit more about it in a second. So he started knocking at doors and everything in Texas, the Supreme Court, the legislators and whatever, so that Texas would make a law regarding alternative dispute resolution. So Texas is actually, a pioneer in many ways in terms of alternative dispute resolution. And what does that mean? Well, mediation in particular is very different, because mediation comes from the word middle, because there's someone right in the middle, but the person is trying to help the parties work it out, basically. So it's interesting. It's really good, and it's very satisfying to see how they can work out their differences at times. And so that's what it's called, alternative dispute resolution. And then arbitration is pretty much the same as the judicial position, where you have to decide after you hear the case. But it's a lot more private than court. So some mediators maybe specialize a little bit, but you can do mediations of any kind.
Okay.
You can do neighborhood mediations, for that matter, where neighbors are fighting each other, or you can do criminal even. But I did mostly family and civil stuff, where I would help them. If they were suing each other, I would try to help them work it out on their own.
What's the most challenging aspect of that kind of work?
Well, especially in divorces, for example, it's they sometimes hate each other really bad, and so they're in conflict. And how do you get them to understand each other? And often I would mention their kids, because they often love their kids more than they hated each other, So that was a good clientele, in a sense, that I did, the people who were getting a divorce. Actually, I did mediations for the federal government, the military, for example, the Justice Department, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I did quite a few for them, and even the Agricultural Agency, I did mediation for them. Well, I enjoyed them all. I mean, all of those that had to do with the federal agency were mostly employment cases. So that was a good thing, to help employees. Sometimes the employees wanted to bring about a complaint that really had nothing to do with legal, reasons. it was more personal. So it was good to be able to, help them figure it out, and especially for example, the postal service. They had a special kind of mediation program that was even more people-oriented than others, and it was a good program, and I enjoyed doing them.
What are you hoping to accomplish over the next few years?
Well, I have grandkids, so I'm looking more into family than. I've always looked into family, obviously, but I'm trying to enjoy that portion of my life a little bit more, now, and then I still work with some agencies and stuff, but I'm slowing down. That's all. It's about time. I've never had a mentor as such, but I've had friends who have helped me quite a bit, and so I think I've been a mentor more than I've been a mentee. So it makes sense.
As the first Latina in many areas in Houston, what does it mean to bring that perspective to these different areas?
Well, it brings a perspective of, if you really try to do things the right way, you will get, ahead. And also, if you treat people nicely and make friends, they're going to help you. It's interesting because, even in careers where you think that people next to you are competitors, if you make them your friends, they'll help you rather than compete with you. So it's surprising, but that's something I've learned through the years, definitely. And so I've been able to tell, younger generations that, that would be a good thing to do.
So can you talk a little bit about any hardships that you
Sure.
faced?
I think one of my first ones was when I was a college student in El Paso. I went to University of El Paso first before I came to U of H, and I was taking a sociology class, and it so happened that I got sick, so I could not take the first test in that class. So I went back to class, and I gave the professor a doctor's thing saying that I was sick, that I could not be taking the exam because I was sick. He did not accept it, and he said, "You got an F anyway. I cannot let you retake the test. Retake the test after everybody has taken it." And then he said, "And I noticed you have an accent. So my class is very hard. So maybe you should quit right now instead of waiting, because if you wait and you quit too late, then you get an F. If you quit now, you get a withdrawal." And so I said, "No, I'm going to go ahead and stay." And he ended up giving me a B in the class after all. And considering that I had an F in one of the tests, I did pretty well. So that was good. And one thing is that it made me think about, I came to Texas as a teenager, so I already had my experiences in which I was not discriminated like Latinos in Texas, Tejanos have been over the years. So it's interesting because I think of people my age who were discriminated against when they were little children, and they have, and I think that affects the self-view of people who have been treated in a discriminatory way. While with me, I was already grown up in a sense, and so that did not affect my self-image as much as I know that Latinos who have been raised, Tejanos who've been raised here, have experienced a lot of that since youth. So I think it's a little bit put in the interior where they actually feel maybe that might be partly true, and that they are not as good as. So.
Were there any times after that you?
Oh yeah, I was a judge one. I was already a judge, and I'm sitting in the courtroom, and there's a lawyer who comes and he starts, being very, very unpleasant and very, disrespectful. And he said, "I want to talk to the judge." And it just so happened that my clerk at the time was an older white guy. So obviously he was he thought that the other guy was the judge and I was the clerk. So he, like I said, he treated me very badly. And then my clerk is watching all of this, and he is, enjoying it. He thinks it's so funny. And so so he finally goes to who he thinks the judge is, and then my clerk says, "You just talk to her." And so that was interesting, his reaction when he realized that he had been, being disrespectful to the judge herself. So it's not because of being Latina, because being a judge, or a woman. I think it's was because what he thought my position was. And so he treated me bad because of my lower position, supposedly. But he assumed that obviously that the Latina woman was the one with the lower position in the white gown.
Is there any other sort of part of your upbringing that you think sort of impacts your ability to kind of move through these situations?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think especially my dad was, very diplomatic person. So I've always learned to be very diplomatic in my, treatment of people. And so, yeah, I think that was easy. But, I remember there was an article about me as a pioneer in Houston law, for example. And one of the things they asked me is, how did you handle it? I said, with humor and grace. You would, try to bring some humor to it in a way that that would make them think about it, but without insulting them. And I think that's a better way. I was a judge already when the mediation movement started coming to Texas. And so there was no law that provided mediation as such yet, which there is now in many areas of law. But I am in court, and there's two older men in each of the side of the aisle, and they're looking at each other in a way that that they know each other, but they hate each other. So that sort of struck me, and they were all both elderly. And so one of them is called by the prosecutor to before me, and the prosecutor says, "You're being charged with assault. How do you plead?" And he said, "Not guilty." And so the prosecutor, which is interesting, had already taken a mediation class. And he said, "Judge, these people are neighbors, and I think maybe mediation would be the way to, solve this case rather than, going to trial." And I knew about mediation, but it was cognitively about mediation. I had never experienced it. So I called the victim, supposedly, and I asked him if he was interested in going to mediation also. And he said, okay, after I told him what I thought mediation was. And sure enough, I reset the case for 90 days. They go to mediation, and they come back, and they're sitting together. And I still remember that. And they're sitting together, and then when the defendant is being called, the offender, in other words, is being called to in front of me, he wants to show me a piece of paper. And the piece of paper, they actually apologize to each other. So I think that's interesting. The victim is apologizing to the offender. The victim also promised not to throw trash in the backyard of the offender. And the offender promised not to play the piano, I think it was, or some other instrument after certain hours of the night. So you can almost see that whole, history of escalation of hate between the both of them. And the fact that in mediation, as a judge, I had the power to find him guilty or not guilty. But either way, I don't think I would have ever been able to help him de-escalate. I think actually the other way, it would have been that it would have escalated even more, whether I found him guilty or not guilty. And so that sort of was a eureka moment for me, a moment like, wow, it's so, if you do mediations and you put them together, you may be able to get them to resolve it, rather than me finding the person guilty or not guilty. So that sort of impressed me, and I started sending cases to mediation. And then after that, I said, I'll become a mediator. So, and I did it. Often I speak about just cultural diversity and how mediators, when I'm teaching mediators, how they should be able to recognize that there are differences in people, and if they're doing something that you think is weird, it might be because that's the way they were brought up, rather than because they're acting in bad faith. And so a lot of that, it was that, and then different parts of mediation, the mediation movement that I've discussed with law students or incoming mediators, and I enjoy it. But I've taught at each of the law schools. I've taught at some point in time or another, I've been invited to talk, you know, nationally about the cultural part of mediation, for example. Yeah, we're pretty much there, yeah. I belong to the Lone Star Legal Aid, the board. That's a good one. They do a lot of good work for the people of Texas. And over the years, I've been involved in different organizations. Like I was president of SED, Jobs for Progress, many years ago. I'm talking about. LULAC, yes, I've been very involved. I'm not as involved as I used to be, but I used to be very involved with LULAC, definitely.
Did you hold a position in any council?
I'm not sure I did. No, my husband did. You know, he was legal counsel for Johnny Mata when Johnny was the president of the state. The Latins, I think it's a good term. I mean, people like it. Now, my first language is Spanish, and in Spanish, just about every person and every object, it has a gender. So in a sense, I don't think I'll ever be able to forego the gender adjectives of sorts. But I can see how people think that Latins with the X at the end is a good thing because it equalizes. You know, the genders and the different choices. So yeah, so I think it's good, but again, it's not something that I necessarily use myself.
How do you want to be remembered?
Just as a person who tried to do as much for the community and her family than I've done, and hopefully I'll be an example to many. I think I have been over the years, you know, mostly to law students in general. But yeah.